This is also a time of change for my family.
This is also a time of change for my family. King Charles had opened thousands of official papers without allowing a single page to betray his emotions. But this document was different. The moment he reached the second paragraph, his hand stopped moving. His expression hardened. Then, he lowered the classified memo onto the desk without speaking. Hidden inside its carefully worded financial language was a devastating claim. Camilla had quietly changed who could approve access to a protected royal fund, and Charles had never authorized it. Charles remained alone in his Buckingham Palace study. The sealed memorandum came from the royal household's internal audit office, the team responsible for checking whether palace money followed the king's approved rules. At its center was the Sovereign Family Support Fund, a protected reserve used for family duties, emergency residences, security costs, and discreet assistance for working royals. The king read again. Camilla had added her private household office as a mandatory approval point for selected withdrawals. Her staff could delay requests, demand explanations, or redirect them before they reached the sovereign's financial secretary, the official who managed financial decisions on Charles's behalf. What had once moved directly toward the monarch now passed through a barrier created beside him. Charles checked the authorization date 3 times. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the file, and looked at the financial secretary across the desk. "Who believes she had permission to do this?" he asked. The official did not answer. That pause struck harder than any denial. Charles had defended Camilla for years, yet her office had acted as though his authority could be borrowed without his knowledge. The final page deepened the betrayal. An administrative stamp linked to the sovereign's office appeared beneath it, but Charles's signature was missing. Someone had created the impression of royal consent while carefully avoiding proof that he had actually granted it. Then he opened the restricted appendix and found William's name. 2 requests connected to the prince's household had been delayed after the new rule began, leaving father and son unaware of who had blocked them. Charles closed the folder and pressed the call button. He ordered Camilla to meet him privately before the evening engagement. Yet, before she reached the study, William received a discreet message confirming that his household appeared inside the classified file. As the Queen walked toward the closed door, the future king began asking why his family had been placed behind a financial barrier carrying her authority. The memo did more than expose a change in financial procedure. It placed 3 people on opposite sides of a single locked door. Charles saw a marriage suddenly shadowed by secrecy. Camilla saw a private administrative decision becoming a test of loyalty. William saw proof that decisions affecting his family had been made without his knowledge. Before any confrontation began, each understood the same brutal truth. This was no longer about money. It was about who truly held influence beside the crown. Charles stood in a private anteroom with his aides, unable to ignore what the file threatened to destroy. For years, the king had defended Camilla's position inside the monarchy, even when public anger made that loyalty costly. An equerry is a senior royal aide who assists the monarch with official and personal duties. Now, the trust he had protected so fiercely appeared to have been used to reshape authority behind his back. "One of them will believe I failed them," Charles admitted. He looked toward the closed study door, knowing his wife expected protection while his son expected honesty. The monarch had spent years trying to hold both relationships together, yet the classified memo had forced those bonds into direct conflict, and silence could no longer protect anyone. Camilla dismissed her attendance the moment she received the summons. She sat before her dressing table, removed a bracelet, and placed it down with a sharp click. Her private secretary remained nearby as the queen consort insisted the changes had been introduced to stop careless demands, not to weaken Charles. She believed uncontrolled requests could damage the household, but beneath that argument sat a deeper fear. William had never truly accepted her influence. William received only a redacted summary, a version of the document with sensitive details hidden. Even that was enough. One request from his household had been delayed for 11 days because of additional consort-level review. The prince read the phrase twice. No approved royal finance procedure gave Camilla that power, and no official had warned him that her office had entered the process. Catherine immediately recognized the pattern. She reminded her husband of a family support request connected to a temporary residence adjustment that had suddenly stalled without explanation. Palace officials had answered every question except the most important one. Who had stopped it? William now understood that the delay had not been random. Someone had built a private gate around resources connected to his family. Camilla prepared to say she had protected the monarchy from waste. William prepared to argue that she had created authority where none existed. Charles waited between them, holding a document that supported neither defense completely. By the time the Queen reached the study door, the dispute had become far more dangerous. A collision between a marriage, an heir, and a hidden chain of control. No one was willing to claim the alteration had begun with a dramatic decree or a signed command. It began during a winter reception, beneath polite conversation and carefully controlled smiles. One request had reached Camilla at precisely the wrong moment. One private exchange had hardened her suspicion, and before the palace understood what had happened, a temporary safeguard became a permanent obstacle. The classified memo did not merely explain the new system. It traced the decision back to the exact evening when trust inside the family began to fracture. Camilla had grown uneasy months before that night. Senior royal households were requesting larger sums for travel, property repairs, ceremonial preparation, and new staff. The Queen believed too many expenses were moving forward without enough challenge. Her office had no independent control over the protected fund, but officials sometimes asked for her comments on costs linked to joint duties or shared residences. That informal role slowly convinced her aides that consultation could become authority. The tension finally broke at a December reception inside Windsor Castle. William approached one of Camilla's senior aides and demanded an explanation for a delayed security allocation connected to a family residence. The aide replied that the request still required the Queen's comfort. In palace language, that phrase meant her personal approval. The prince immediately rejected it. He said no such power existed under the approved rules, and the words landed harder than he intended. Camilla heard enough to feel publicly diminished. She remained composed until the reception ended, but later told her private secretary that William must never again treat her household as ceremonial decoration. The future king had challenged and invented authority, yet she experienced the moment as a rejection of her place beside Charles. That wound mattered because years of public acceptance had never fully erased her fear of being tolerated rather than respected. Charles noticed her silence during the drive back. He asked whether anything had happened, but Camilla blamed exhaustion and turned away. The king accepted the answer because he trusted her. He did not know she had already decided that her office needed a power no one could dismiss. Charles entered the palace briefing room, carrying no memo. He no longer needed it. The shock had passed, the confrontation had ended, and the facts were clear. Camilla had altered a system she had no authority to control. Officials had allowed fear to replace judgment, and William's household had paid the price of that silence. Now, the king had to decide what survived: resentment, humiliation, or order. When he began speaking, his voice was steady. The verdict was not designed to destroy his wife. It was designed to restore the crown. Charles permanently removed Camilla's private office from every form of royal financial authorization, oversight, and consultation. The queen consort could take part only when a future sovereign granted written permission for a specific purpose. A sovereign is the reigning monarch who holds final constitutional authority. The ruling mattered because informal influence had been allowed to shape decisions involving security, family residences, and the future household of the heir. The king then announced new protections. Every request connected to the protected fund would require a named recommendation, legal confirmation, and the monarch's recorded approval. Phrases such as the united household view would carry no authority, and implied consent was finished. Charles did not place the blame on one office alone. Addressing senior staff, he admitted that his own reliance on unwritten trust had allowed confusion to grow around his power. The monarch had assumed loyalty would protect the rules. Instead, silence had weakened them. Camilla accepted the restrictions and finally approved her private secretary's resignation. She did not attend the briefing, but later told Charles that remaining beside the crown meant surrendering the influence she had tried to secure. The queen lost administrative power, but she did not lose her marriage. Her punishment was quieter and harder. Affection could no longer be used as a path toward authority. Charles later met William in the same study where the classified memo had first been opened. The king closed the folder, locked it inside a cabinet, and handed his son the only key to the new oversight archive, the protected record created to preserve every future financial decision. William accepted it and briefly placed his hand on his father's shoulder. The prince did not forget what happened, yet he recognized that Charles had chosen transparency over appearances. Their trust began to rebuild because the monarch had finally placed clear duty above private loyalty. The crisis ended with every disputed change reversed, William's access restored, the responsible officials removed, and Camilla's hidden checkpoint abolished. Charles had begun this moment stunned by what happened behind his back, but he ended it fully aware of what the crown demanded. Trust may hold a family together, but only accountability can protect a throne.